Kelly and Killian here for a Thrifty Notion to bring you the third video in our Textile Talk series, which is just a series where we dive into anything you could possibly want to know about fabrics. We're starting at the absolute basics, and we'll be diving deeper as time goes on. So last week we discussed the three main categories of fabric, which are characterized by how they are produced, and today we're going to be diving deeper into woven fabrics specifically and talking about the four most common weave structures and how those structures impact the overall feel and functionality of your fabric. So the four weave patterns we're going to be talking about today are plain weave, basket weave, twill weave, and satin weave. But this is just part one, so we'll be talking about more in future videos, so keep an eye out for those. All right, let's dive on in. So when we talk about weave pattern, what we're really referring to is the way that the yarns that make up the fabric are woven together. And there are two yarns responsible for this pattern. There are the warp and the weft threads of the fabric. So warp threads run vertically through the length of the fabric, and these are the ones that are placed first on the loom, and then weft threads are woven throughout these. So the process for weaving any fabric is going to start the same. The warp threads, the vertical threads, are going to be placed on the loom, and then the weft threads will be woven into those. The most basic weave is going to be just a plain weave, or what's also sometimes referred to as a calico or tabby weave. This is the weave used for things like quilting cotton, chiffon, and other plain weave fabrics. So these fabrics will have a very simple perpendicular weave structure that is characterized by an over-under pattern that produces kind of like a checkerboard effect. So when you think about a woven fabric, if you're thinking about zooming in on that weave and what that looks like, this is probably the one that will come to mind first. A variation on the plain weave would be a basket weave fabric, and this has the same exact pattern as a plain weave, but instead of there being single yarns making up that pattern, there will be two yarns next to each other that are forming that pattern as a pair. So a basket weave fabric will be very similar to a plain weave fabric, but there will be some differences in the overall cats, man. So the basket weave fabric will have a more textured appearance and feel, and it will have a more emphasized checkerboard effect due to the fact that the pattern is made up of two yarns at a time. One factor that is affected by this slight change in weave structure is the stability of the fabric. So when you have the fabric and you kind of shift it a little bit, plain weave fabrics are not going to shift very much because they're very stable and the yarns are very tightly woven together. So even though a basket weave fabric technically has the same weave structure in a sense, because it is made up of two yarns at a time, there's going to be half the amount of crossover and of overlap between the weave structure, and so it's going to have a lot more give, a lot more movement. This means that it's going to be more pliable, but it's also going to be a little bit stronger. It's going to be harder to rip, and it'll add some other durability as well. The next weave pattern that I consider most common would be the twill weave, and this one is characterized by having kind of a diagonal ribbed texture to it. This is the weave structure used for denim. So if you think about denim and how it has that slight texture to it, that's what I'm talking about. And twill weaves are really interesting because they are often a heavier weight fabric, not always, but twill weaves actually are characterized by having more drape and more flow to them than a standard plain weave fabric because there isn't as much crossover between the yarns. So what makes this diagonal kind of rib texture to a twill fabric is that the weft yarns are woven over and under several warp yarns at a time instead of being woven over and under one at a time, as is the case with a plain weave fabric. So like I said, this will mean that they drape more easily, but they also are going to be more prone to fraying than a plain weave fabric is. The last weave pattern that I want to talk about would be the satin weave, and I do want to clarify that a satin fabric and a sateen fabric actually have the same weave pattern, but what makes them different is the fiber content of the yarn used to weave the fabric. So a sateen is going to be made out of a short, staple fiber, something like cotton, and a satin fabric will be made out of long filament fibers like polyester or silk. So satin and sateen fabrics are going to have a much glossier surface, and this is again going to be impacted by the fiber content, but the weave itself will impact this quite a bit. So if you've seen a cotton sateen fabric, you know that even though it's cotton, it is definitely a little bit shinier than any other cotton fabric you're going to interact with. So what produces this glossy finish on a satin weave fabric is the float yarns. And this is when the weft yarn of the fabric passes over multiple warp threads before passing under a single warp thread and back over multiple again. So in order to be classified as a satin weave, it'll have to pass over 3 or more warp threads at a time. And then like I said, it'll go under one, over 3 again, or more, depending on the chosen method. And this long distance between the interlocking yarns is what makes that luxurious, kind of lustrous appearance to the fabric. The presence of these float threads means that satin weave fabrics are going to be less durable in the sense that they're going to snag much more easily. There's a lot more distance there in the pattern for the yarn to be snagged, but they are going to be less prone to tearing. So there really is a give and take when we talk about durability of different fabrics, because some may be more prone to tearing, but they're less prone to snagging, and some are more prone to snagging, but they're not going to tear as easily. So it's important to know these little factors when you're picking the fabric for your project. So I just want to recap really quickly that plain weave fabrics have a simple checkerboard over under pattern, and a basket weave is produced with the same pattern with 2 yarns at a time, kind of woven as one. A twill weave is going to have the same pattern as a plain weave, but instead of being over and under 1 at a time, they're going to go over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2. I think there may even be instances where a twill weave can be more than 2 yarns, but it will be 2 to 2 or 3 to 3. It'll be the same number every time. A satin weave fabric is similar to a twill weave in that it passes over multiple yarns at a time, but instead of passing over multiple and under that same multiple, it'll be something like a 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. So while these weave patterns may sound like they have subtle differences, when you look at them side by side on like a diagram, or you look at the fabric side by side, you'll see that there really are some big differences in how the final fabric looks, how it feels, and how it drapes due to these weave structures. So I hope you guys enjoyed learning about these different weave patterns. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below, or leave them on the blog post that is linked in the description box. I cannot wait to share more in this series with you guys. Keep an eye out, and if you want to keep up with the series, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you guys very soon, and happy sewing! So the process for weaving... You okay, Pepper? You okay? I have a computer here, a laptop. There's not space for you to be in the video. You gonna try again? Oh, she did better that time. Oh, you're typing, babe. You gonna help me write this blog post? Okay. What was I saying? Pepper, I don't remember what I was telling them. Okay. So